For my anatomy project, I wanted to focus on something I knew I'd be passionate about. So I chose Riverdale. Riverdale, a show well known for its crazy antics and teenage girl audience, has some of the oddest injuries and deaths I have ever seen. And I've seen it twice. So after doing some extensive research, I found multiple scenes that I could inspect to display the anatomy behind the chaos. Betty Cooper, one of the main characters of Riverdale, often references her dark side, and later finds out that she has the supposed serial killer gene, according to her FBI agent brother. As a result, we see her losing control throughout the show, which leads to some superficial injuries on her palms from clenching her fists together. These injuries are distal to her wrist and, when in prone position, lateral to her navel. The audience builds a sympathetic relationship with Betty as we watch her go through the trauma of her brainwashed sister, her murderous dad, and her overbearing mother. I think there's really a real depth to her character. Just kidding, she kills her cat. In fact, she strikes it with a rock over its head in a position cranial to the tail and superior to the heart. Must be the darkness inside of her. Or maybe just the teachings of her father, Hal Cooper, or the Black Hood, local serial killer and guy who handed her the rock. He seems to be obsessed with her throughout the length of the second and third seasons, even faking his own death to lure her into this false sense of security. To do this, he of course decides to make a cross-sectional cut through his wrist like any sane person would do, and leaves his severed hand in the rubble of an explosion. This cut was proximal to the metal carpals, and ooh look, here he is with his hook hand stalking Betty in her empty school on prom night. Of course, she wasn't his only victim. He also attempted to assassinate Fred Andrews, dad of Archie Andrews, widely regarded as the only sane character in the show. We see Mr. Cooper, donning his infamous black hood, shoot Andrews point blank in the upper left quadrant superior to his pelvic cavity and anterior to his vertebrae. Fred isn't the only Andrew to sustain injuries throughout the show. Archie, the gullible American boy he is, finds his way into a barn in Ohio and gets his head caved in while flirting with the owner of the land. This strike, landing on the back of the skull, is posterior to the eyes and the nose. Provided his body's in the prone position, it's also cephalic to a previous hand injury, a blood oath with business tycoon Hiram Lodge, his girlfriend's father. This cut, at an odd diagonal through his palm, would be considered an oblique cut. After moving back to his hometown of Riverdale from prison, Hiram Lodge relaunches his business empire with the intent to buy out the entire town. Of course, this gets him into all sorts of trouble, and as is expected, he is also shot. This tends to be a theme. Here you can see a strike to his abdominal pelvic cavity, presumably in the epigastric region, intermediate to the rib cage. Although these injuries are quite out of the ordinary and would be considered nonsensical, they are in the end merely wounds. So how about the deaths of Riverdale?
Surely they are more reasonable, and no one dies during a school musical production of Carrie.
Midge, a character no one could care less about if they tried, found herself one of the many victims of the Black Hood. She suffered multiple stab wounds, at least one deep enough to pierce through her pericardium cavity and puncture her heart. There were 3 others that stood out as well. One through the left pleural cavity, which was inferior to the one through the left shoulder, and then one more through the left lumbar region. Another character dead to the Black Hood's wrath was Miss Grundy, who frankly deserved it considering she had a relationship with a high school sophomore. Her windpipe, or trachea, was crushed when the Black Hood applied pressure to it on the side of her throat ventral to the spinal cavity. Finally, the last death I'll be covering is that of Boy Scout leader Dilton Doily. His was generally straightforward, as it really only involved 3 runic symbols on the side of his body, dorsal to his mouth and medial to his right forearm. It wasn't the carvings that killed him, however. The only thing that could take credit for that was a psychologically addictive D&D knockoff cult that forced its players to drink cyanide in order to meet the Gargoyle King and ascend to the kingdom. Lest we forget this was orchestrated by Archie's girlfriend's father, who wanted to push drugs onto all the local teens, and the runoff from the factory gave everyone seizures that got them sent to a nunnery mixed with a gay conversion camp that tested different drugs on them as well as worked with public farm.